Have you ever wondered if there's a smarter way to learn math? Something better than just grinding through a textbook from page 1 to the end? Well, today we're going to deconstruct a really fascinating curriculum from the Rebound portal. They treat learning less like a random sprint and more like, well, like an architectural project.
It's the huge question, isn't it? The one that hangs over so many people. Math just feels like this impossible mountain to climb. But what if the reason so many people struggle isn't what we've always been told? What if it has absolutely nothing to do with being bad at math?
And boom, there it is. That's the core idea behind this entire strategy. Failure isn't about ability, it's about a flawed approach. It's kind of like trying to build a second story of a house when you haven't even poured the concrete for the foundation. Of course it's going to fall apart.
So, here's the game plan. We'll start by looking at that foundation problem. Then, we'll get into a cool concept called 2 kinds of weight. After that, we'll break down the 4-tier system they use, see how the curriculum is actually built, and finally, wrap up with why this whole method is just so incredibly effective.
All right, let's get into it. First things first, we have to really diagnose the problem. Before you can build a solid structure, you got to understand exactly why the old one keeps collapsing.
So here's the key takeaway. Topics like number and algebra, they aren't just random chapters in a book. Think of them as the concrete and the steel beams of mathematics. If that base is shaky, every single thing you try to build on top of it, geometry, trigonometry, you name it, is going to feel wobbly, way more difficult, and honestly, just super frustrated.
Okay, so if we're building a curriculum from the ground up, how do we decide what comes first? Well, the secret lies in understanding that every single topic on the syllabus carries 2 completely different kinds of weight. And this distinction is everything. On the one hand, you've got direct weight. That's the obvious stuff, right? How many points is geometry worth on the exam? You can look at past papers and figure that out pretty easily. But the real game changer, the secret sauce here, is foundational weight. This is the hidden power a topic has to unlock other topics.
And this is where that domino effect kicks in. See, if your algebra is weak, you don't just lose marks on the algebra questions. Oh no, you start leaking marks all over the place. In graphs, in trigonometry, in pretty much everything. A tiny crack in that foundation causes massive problems throughout the entire building. And that's why this foundational weight is actually way more important than the direct weight.
So with this idea of 2 different weights, the curriculum designers went and sorted every single topic into a super clear 4-tier system. This is the architectural plan for how to learn.
Let's start from the bottom up, with the most critical level, Tier 1. You got to think of these as the load-bearing walls of your math knowledge. Literally everything else rests on them.
Tier 1 is completely non-negotiable. These are your fundamentals, specifically number and algebra. They have the highest foundational weight, period. They feed into almost everything else. The strategy is simple. You have to master these first. Secure this base, and you've built a stable platform for everything that's coming next.
Okay, next up, we build on that solid foundation with Tier 2. These are the major components of the structure. They carry a lot of direct weight, meaning they're worth a ton of marks all by themselves. So, in Tier 2, you find the heavy hitters, like geometry and statistics. They're super valuable for the points they score on their own. But some, like geometry, also do double duty. They have a pretty good foundational weight too, because you really need to understand it to tackle something like trigonometry later on.
And now for Tier 3. I love this name they came up with. Solid receivers. Think of these like the rooms inside the house that you can only get to once the foundation and the main walls are already up.
These topics, things like trigonometry or graphs, they're mainly receivers. They don't really support other topics down the line, but they depend heavily on you mastering algebra and geometry first. And here's the magic part. If you put in the work on Tiers 1 and 2, these topics become dramatically easier to understand.
And finally, we get to the very top of our structure, Tier 4. These are kind of like the decorative elements, or what they call the self-contained islands.
So topics like sets or financial math, they're important, sure, but they don't really connect to anything else. They're islands. You could learn them at pretty much any time, and it wouldn't affect your understanding of other topics. So the strategy is to put them last. That way, you ensure your most valuable study time is spent on the high-impact, super-connected content first. Smart, right?
Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like when you turn it into a step-by-step learning path? Let's take a look at the blueprint in action. See, this is that locked sequence we were talking about. The logic is crystal clear. You start with number. That's the universal foundation. Then you lay the second foundation, which is algebra. Only then do you move on to applications like mensuration,
And after that, you hit geometry, which sets you up perfectly to tackle trigonometry. Every single step is a prerequisite for the next. It's a path, not just a random checklist.
This all sounds really logical, but what's the actual payoff for a student? Why does building your knowledge in this specific order give you such a huge advantage?
Here it is. This is the payoff. Just by completing the first 5 modules in this carefully structured sequence, a student has already covered the content that makes up a whopping 60 to 70% of a typical exam paper. I mean, that is an incredible return on a focused investment of your time.
And that's really the big idea here. Your effort compounds. This isn't just about learning topics one by one. It's about making your learning way more efficient. Every single hour you invest in mastering those Tier 1 topics, like algebra, isn't just an hour for algebra. It pays you back with dividends in 5 or 6 other modules down the line. It is the absolute definition of learning smarter, not just harder.
And that leaves us with one final question to think about. When you look at how you approach learning, and not just in math, but in any complex subject, are you just kind of randomly stacking bricks and hoping for the best? Or are you deliberately, carefully building on solid ground? Because the architecture of how you learn, well, that might just be the most important factor in your success.